Hello and welcome to the Trust Factor Podcast, the only podcast that guarantees your success when you implement its divine age-old teachings. It's another wintry blizzard-filled day in Toronto on this Sunday. Thank you so much for joining. There's probably not a lot going on anyways, given that it's another record snowfall that we're going to have today. So a lot of people are hibernating. I get it. I've been here long enough. But if you enjoy the winter and you're out skiing and snowboarding and skating and doing all that wonderful kind of stuff and the cold doesn't get to you that much, especially if you're young. If you're young, you're resilient. You bounce back quickly. You get indoors and you thaw out inside of minutes. If you get older, once I'd say you hit 40s, it starts to become more difficult. At 50, the cold stays in your bones. Either way, enjoy it. We're in Canada. It's winter. Let's get back into the book because I watched a documentary last night that I want to tell you about that is going to touch on this very point. It says like this: mankind lives with all kinds of skewed concepts and twisted ideologies, for each person decides his own truth, which is none other than a lie that is liable to destroy the world, the entire world. Radical Islam, fascists, communists, revolutionaries have destroyed and continue to destroy millions of people in the name of their truth. But with Emunah, people connect to the Creator's truth, which is the only truth. Without it, the world cannot continue to exist. Emunah is therefore the foundation upon which the future of the world stands. It's a very simple concept, but we could talk about it for hours. At the end of every day, my friends, understand that everything that is brought to you by mankind, by someone of flesh and blood, and I don't care who it is and how well intended they are flawed, because there is no human being on planet Earth that doesn't have an evil inclination. So whatever policies they put in place, they could seem wonderful and they could be very well intended. But the reality of humanity is that it will always be self-serving. There are greater people and there are lesser people. But at the end of the day, they are humans. So the degree upon which there is corruption in policy that you're following will depend on the individuals who are instituting and upholding these policies. If you're dealing with a religious government like we used to have once upon a time, okay, you've got greater people who are working on themselves. They recognize that they have an evil inclination. They learn God's laws. They understand and incorporate God into their lives on a daily basis. So the odds are in your favor that you're going to live a much better lifestyle. Just like when it comes to divorce, for example. The religious community is not immune from divorce. Of course it happens. But when you compare the numbers in a religious Orthodox community to a secular atheist type community, you will see drastic differences. Drastic. It is an epidemic in the secular world, whereas in the religious world, in the Orthodox world, sure, it's a problem. It's a problem everywhere. Why? Because we have human beings. But we have those very same human beings working on themselves, incorporating God into their lives, making efforts that everybody else doesn't make because they don't understand that there is this thing called a creator and that there are rules and regulations, that there's a playbook. There's a manual. So they fly by the seat of their pants. They get into trouble. They think it's all them and everything falls apart. Whereas we understand differently. We know that everything is perfect. Everything is a test. It's incumbent upon us to be able to step up and meet those tests, to be able to improve our character, to be able to improve our partner's character. That's who we are. That's how we're programmed. So therefore, we succeed. We succeed much more than those who aren't trying. But we're not perfect. We're far from perfect. Now, there's an idea that derech eretz kadma la Torah, which means that the way of the world came before Torah, came before the mitzvahs. In other words, a lot of people will tell you that you don't need the Torah to tell you how to be a good person. And while that may be true, it is far from reality, because all you need to do is look around at different civilizations, at different populations of people living in remote areas of the world, and even not so remote. I remember watching a documentary a long time ago about a tribe somewhere in Africa. I don't remember where it is, but it was a thing I was just flipping through, and I saw a individual interviewing 3 or 4 of these African individuals who were sitting around a table that had all kinds of skulls and bones of humans on this table. And the conversation was, and these people were dressed like you and I, by the way. They weren't wearing, fig leaf belt, right? These were people that were dressed like you and I, working and interacting in normal society. And yet it was perfectly standard and traditional culture for them to eat human beings. In fact, not only is it normal, it's preferred, and it is a sign of respect. Okay, understand just how warped one's ideology can get. That they have been conditioned to think that if they take an individual who was important to them, who they loved, and when that person passes, they take that body and consume it, that they are elevating that other individual. So you understand what's going on over here? Okay, they're a small minority, but that doesn't excuse it. That points to exactly what the book is telling you. That without God, people will make mistakes, and some of those mistakes are not reversible. Some of those mistakes are dramatic. You know, the fact that the body came from the earth, and to the earth it needs to return. And as long as that body doesn't go back into the earth, there is probably nothing more painful for that soul than to know that it is not going back into where it came from. That it's going to be cremated, that it's going to be thrown into the ocean, that it's going to be consumed by another individual. Absolutely nothing worse. That soul suffers for eternity. The soul only gets rest when the body is in the ground and it's consumed by the ground. That's when the soul gets rest. So if it's not going into that ground and being consumed by the earth, then you know what happens? The soul suffers for eternity. Very painful. People don't know this because they're not learning it. If they learned it, they would never cremate. If they learned it, they would never even consider doing crazy things like consuming human beings. But because it's become accepted culture and practice in these civilizations that exist today in 2026, you can go find them. And they were talking to this individual who was interviewing them, and they were surprised that he didn't understand where they were coming from. They thought it was funny that this individual thought that they were weird for eating their loved ones. Okay, just so you understand, I'm sorry it's a little bit graphic, but it's reality. Now, last night I watched another documentary. This documentary was a miniseries called Chernobyl. And it was about the nuclear power plant that exploded in Chernobyl in Russia back, I believe, in 1986. And it was a very, very telling story of the human frailty and our flaws. And what the USSR was at the time, when this disaster occurred, they were debating how to approach the subject with regards to the public. And an old-timer stood up and made an announcement. And the announcement was very clear. It was a drasha. It was a Torah dissertation, only that Torah was the government. Not only did they not want you to have a God, they wanted the institution of communism, or what they referred to as socialism at the time also. They wanted that to be your God, and that you should have faith in that system. And if you don't have faith in that system, then you are a heretic. And that was the system. So they put humanity at the top of decision making, and they made that humanity their God. And that humanity was full of flaws, and ultimately, you know exactly what happened. They tried to cover up their mistakes, and they tried their best to sweep it under the rug. But the world wasn't having it, and you can only do so much hiding and fancy footwork when the world is on the brink because you've just destroyed your nuclear power plant that you didn't put the proper safety mechanisms in place to be able to safeguard. The entire world was at stake. If you understand what could have happened, ultimately, the USSR sacrificed what is probably hundreds of thousands of individual lives that they recruited people to come and do certain jobs to avert catastrophe. There should have been a 4 to 6 megaton explosion of nuclear material that would have spread around the planet in no time. Okay, and today, because they sacrificed so many lives of innocent individuals who came in to try and do what was required to avert this disaster, and thank God they were successful to an extent, that didn't happen. But today, there is still today, 40 years later, and probably going to be for the next 100 years, a 2,600 kilometer radius around Chernobyl of a no-go zone that is so radioactive that you're not allowed to enter into these areas unless you have a permit. Understand? This was the fault of human frailty, of a government, a communist government that did away with God and made themselves into God. And if you listen to the speech that they gave, you will understand that that's exactly what they all got behind, and they had to stand behind it, and they had pride that the government was their God. And because of that, the world could have come to an end. It was shocking. This was a small miniseries that I watched last night. The point is, when people make themselves out to be gods with their frailty and with their poor decision-making and their evil inclination that is self-serving, this is what we have. We have lies, we have deceit, we have corruption, we have mistakes, we have cover-ups. That's what happens when you don't have God in your life. Truth, he says, since the Creator has a purpose for creating this world, does it make any sense that the Creator would demand that a person perform the tasks that he tells us to tasks here on earth without telling us what those tasks are? Obviously not. Can one even think that a Creator would give rewards and punishment without telling people what's permissible and what's not? It's impossible that the Creator would trust a person to find his mission on earth on his own. If LG gives you an instruction manual for a $20 toaster oven that you can buy at Walmart, dirt cheap, but the first thing you see when you open up that box is an instruction manual, then you better believe that the most sophisticated and most consequential creation on planet Earth, that being human beings, we came with a manual. We have our instruction manual. It's called the Torah. The root word of Torah is hora'ah. Hora'ah means instruction. Understand, that's your instruction manual. If you haven't read it up until now, you're flying in the dark. If you haven't read it up until now, my friends, it's time to pick it up and start reading it. The right time to do it was yesterday, and the next best time to do it is today. That will tell you what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. In every stage of your life, from the second a person is born and brought into this world until the second they're taken out from this world, everything is in there. All you need to do is sit with somebody who's capable of teaching it to you, of giving it over in a way that you can connect to. Everybody has their rabbi. You have to understand that's a strong statement. Okay, I went to Hebrew school. I grew up with family and friends that were religious, but it never appealed to me. It never found its home in my heart or in my head. It just never made sense until I met my rabbi. And my rabbi told me all the things that I'd already heard my whole life, but they never found their home until it came from his lips. Explain that? I'm sorry, I can't. That's just how it works. One thing we can point to is what I've said before, that God made a decision. He made a decree to remove my blindfold. And that's why at that time, when that rabbi gave me all the same content, it made sense to me, because God allowed it to make sense. Up until that point, he hardened my heart, not dissimilar to what he's done with Pharaoh. We're in the midst of the parshas, the Torah portions where God brings these plagues down on Egypt. And in there, multiple times it says that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. So we see that that's a real idea, that God can harden your heart. In other words, he can make you not see the truth, not see reality. You know, we see it by Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, who Abraham had to kick out of his house. And she was walking with her son through the desert, and he was dying of thirst, and she was crying. And then eventually it says that God opened up her eyes and she saw the well. Why didn't she see the well? It was there the whole time while she was sitting there crying and mourning her son who was about to die. She didn't see it because God didn't allow her to see it. When he allowed her to, and she opened her eyes, she saw the well. It's the same thing. So my friends, find your rabbi and make an effort. And if it doesn't happen today, try again tomorrow. Try and keep trying and make a prayer. Ask God that he should help you to open up your eyes, remove the blindfold so that you could start to see the reality, so you could start to see truth and start to identify truth and get rid of, do away with the lies that are abound. Have an amazing day, my friends. It's going to be an amazing week. We'll speak again tomorrow. Thank you for spending time with us on the Trust Factor podcast. If you've heard something today that moved you, save this episode and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss upcoming conversations that challenge, empower, and uplift. And if you're on social media, connect with us. Leave your thoughts. Drop a quote that resonated with you. Hashtag the Trust Factor podcast. Until next time, keep growing in your trust and keep living with purpose. I'm Jesse Revivo, and this has been the Trust Factor Podcast. Thanks for listening.